Chapter 3-4. Another quest down, I think to myself as I make my way to my usual table in the guild hall. Sitting down, I let out a sigh. It's been about 2 weeks since I went on that quest with darkness and things have gotten better. I've been cleared by the guild to take higher level quests, so I've completed a few recently by myself. Hadn't seen much of darkness lately, mostly just some waves or glances in the guild, but I want to take the quests myself for a while. Call me selfish all you want, but I do want most of the reward for myself to build up my treasury. Speaking of the gate, I recently discovered something about it. Once I reached level 15, I unlocked a new tab on my card that involved said gate. It was mostly reduced mana consumption and stuff, but scrolling towards the end there was some unlocks that were dozens upon dozens of points but remained locked to the point I couldn't see them. It has been leveling passively, which has been nice. More or less increased portals, rate of fire, speed and mana consumption. Being able to reduce mana consumption has been fantastic. The quests I've been doing lately are clearing some lower level dungeons, which were a figurative walk in the park with how easy they were. Haven't gotten much in terms of magical items. Mainly just a few staffs and swords with very low elemental enchantments, but nothing to write home about. The strongest weapon in my arsenal was still the magic great sword I got from the Death Knight, which has proved useful in a few of the dungeons. I was correct about it being able to increase one's abilities for a short period of time, but even then the sword itself is extremely strong and durable. After that thought, I noticed a large gathering of people around Luna, who was at a table, which was kind of odd. Getting up from my seat, I made my way over to the crowd to see Luna showing a map on the table of what seemed to be a dungeon. She noticed my approach, Gilgamesh, just in time. The crowd of 15 or so people turned to look at me as I approached, parting the way slightly, and they seemed to be weary of my red-eyed gaze once more. What am I in time for? I asked, crossing my arms, ignoring the crowd. A tall burly man with a small purple mohawk and beard, wearing dark shoulder pauldrons, green pants, and pink straps, turned to meet my gaze. A few days ago a scouting party returned with some troubling news, he began. They were sent out to confirm reports of a newly discovered dungeon a few days from Axel by horse. There were 5 members in the party and only one of them returned. Luna then continued, the man arrived severely injured and unfortunately has passed on from his wounds. She seemed sad at this. Before he died he gave us the location of the dungeon and that there was a Death Knight that obliterated them. Death Knight? I said aloud, like the one that me and Darkness defeated a few weeks ago? Speaking of Darkness, I looked around the crowd and noticed her along with them, and she gave me a slight wave. Yes, and from your description of the previous one, this one seems almost the same but even stronger than the one you fought, said Luna. We're organizing a small raid party to take on the dungeon. If you would be willing to join, your experience with this knight would be incredibly useful. I closed my eyes in thought. Another Death Knight? The last one was far from easy to defeat, and while I've gotten stronger, if this one is even more so? This fight could be difficult, but the fact he might have a similar magical weapon, it would be worth the risk. Opening my eyes, Luna stared into mine, waiting for an answer. On one condition, I reply. Luna and the crowd look at me expectantly. I uncross my arms and stick my right hand out, opening up a gate and pulling out the previous Death Knight's black great sword. If the knight has a magical weapon like this one, I will be taking it. I then put some magic into the sword, causing it to glow gold with a slight gold flame. While it used to glow a deep purple, it now glows gold on my command, since it is now a part of my treasury. If this knight is spotted, the sword or other weapon will belong to me. The crowd looks at me and some start to mutter and even outright say that it is not fair, and I immediately silence them with a glare. Luna sighs and slowly looks me in the eye. Fine, it's yours, but only because you've had experience with something like this and information is key. I then dismiss the sword and my arms cross once more. The burly man then speaks again. A local caravan is willing to supply transportation since this dungeon is interfering with their business. They are set to leave within the hour and will meet us by the south gate. I suggest you all quickly get your traveling gear ready because this dungeon is close to 5 days away. The crowd disperses with everyone leaving to get ready, but not before giving me a final glance as they left, probably still angry that I will arguably be taking the best reward. The guild hall slowly started to empty and only me as well as Darkness remained. She approaches me. I hope this knight is as strong, if not stronger, than the last, she speaks while panting slightly. I give her a side glance. Let me guess, your oath as a knight and crusader is the one and only reason you wish to fight it? Not anything else? Of course it is my duty to slay strong rugged monsters and try to avoid capture, she responds, getting even more heat at the last part. Sure it is. I roll my eyes as I make my way to the exit. Snapping out of her internal thoughts, she catches up to me as I leave the guild. Are you going to prepare for the trip? She asks. I have all the supplies I need within my gate, but I would like to purchase more ingredients and food for the trip as a precaution. Do you mind if I join? I need to purchase a few things as well, she asks. If I told you no, you'd probably get a kick out of it, so I won't stop you. I then give a smug grin to her. I would not, she pouts as I let out a hearty laugh, making our way to the market. 45 minutes late, South Gate. Darkness and I made our way to the south exit to see almost everyone there already with the caravan, including about 5 wagons which were carrying various cargo. 4 of which were to contain us probably. I split from Darkness and went a little further away from everyone to wait. It took another 10 minutes or so for everyone else to arrive, and once they all did, the burly man from before spoke. Listen up. I say again, this place is almost a week away, so be prepared for the journey. You will all split up into groups for now and stay inside one of the carriage until the caravan stops for a break or it is the end of the day. You have 5 minutes to pick a carriage, so saddle up and let's move, he finishes. I make my way to the furthest carriage available to hold people and climbed in. I sat down and crossed my arms, leaning my head against the wood of the seat. Within 5 minutes 3 people climbed into the carriage. Opening one eye, I glanced at the 3 people that came in. All seemed around 15 to 17 years old, one brown-haired green-eyed guy carrying a sword and wore leather armor, a pretty-looking black-haired woman with black eyes and her long hair in a ponytail and was wearing what seemed to be a light purple GI meant for fighting, in a some kind of lady spellcaster with a purple cape, magic staff and a wizard hat containing her short brown hair with brown eyes behind a pair of glasses. They were talking about strategies and other small things as they sat down slightly further from me and conversed. The brown-haired guy seemed to be the leader of their little group and seemed to be pretty boisterous. The fighter seemed somewhat the same but much more tame and respectful, while the wizard was the quiet one. Probably the more smart one too. Shortly after they sat down we started to move. They were silent for the most part, and I was okay with that since I was resting, since I had recently returned from a quest barely over an hour ago. It wasn't till about 2 hours into the ride when one of them spoke to me. Hey, you're Gilgamesh, right? I cracked my eye open to see the brown-haired guy staring at me. Yes, what do you want? I'm Justin, it's good to meet you. The fighter over there is Rachel, she waved with a smile, and the brooding wizard is Sam. She sent a small glare at the now named Justin before giving me a slight nod. Don't really know too much about you, and if we're going to work together I thought it'd be a good idea to get to know each other, he ended off with a smile. I opened my other eye and stared at him for a moment to see if he would falter under my gaze, and he hadn't so far. Very well, what do you wish to know? The boy seemed to smile a bit more. What's your class? I can't tell, but you seem like a knight or paladin. I am mostly a warlock, but I recently took a few levels in knight for more close-quarter skills. While most people don't multiclass unless they choose the adventurer class, he responds. I do what I please. The fighter then looks at me. You seem pretty young but older than us. How old are you? I am in my 20s. The wizard looks at me. I've seen you create golden portals and have seen things come from them. What exactly is that? It is my gate of Babylon. I store things ranging from food to weapons and can call them at a moment's notice. I will not go into further detail about it. Now I wish to relax, so don't bother me for a while. I close my eyes and drift off into a slumber. It wasn't till a few hours later I was awoken by the caravan stopping. My eyes opened to see the night sky at the entrance of the carriage and the people riding with me getting off the carriage. Once they exited I stood and stretched, feeling and hearing the satisfying pops of a few joints as I hopped out the back of the carriage. The caravan as well as the adventurers were setting up small fires with their respective groups and already laughing and talking the night away. As I was watching them I decided to start making a fire a little further away from the group and start preparing my dinner. It was another one of those nights where I decided to cook my own dinner for the most part. I had the gate produce a table to prepare on and a pot I could place over the fire that I lit with a simple fire bolt. The pot was already filled with water and I left it to boil as I prepared some ingredients for a simple stew. I chopped up some onions, carrots, potatoes and some other vegetables with a good amount of beef chunks. With the meat already salted and whatnot inside the gate I didn't have to prepare the meat too much, which was fine with me. When the water started to boil I added all the ingredients with a small amount of broth that was already prepared. I put the lid on the pot and placed a ladle on the rack with the pot to stir periodically. Once I sat down to let the stew cook I grabbed a book from my gate and started to read to pass the time. I didn't get too far into my book when I felt someone approaching from behind me. I turned my head slightly to see it was Darkness. I see you're cooking a stew again, but yourself this time. Do you mind if I join you? What about your group? They drank a lot of alcohol and passed out before we could make any food, and I saw you all alone, so I decided to see if you wanted some company, she ended with a small smile. Once again I will not decline since I won't know how you'll react, I said while having a chair appear beside me facing the stew pot. She pouted but decided not to comment as she sat next to me and was gazing into the fire. After about 10 minutes of silence I checked the stew to see how it was doing and to stir it, and it was coming along smoothly and the aroma was almost intoxicating, it was so good. As I put the lid back on I heard some stomachs growl as I looked to my side. Darkness was blushing a bit and I could notice the 3 people that were in my carriage behind her seeming sheepish and hungry. I let out a sigh and had 3 more chairs appear as I motioned them to sit, and they immediately sat down. "Wow man, that smells awesome," said Justin. "Never knew you could cook." "Never asked," was my response as I continued to read. The next hour or so was Justin and his team conversing with Darkness, which she seemed happy about, especially since it seemed she was making more friends. The atmosphere was nice. It's been a while since I enjoyed company. Even as Michael, I would enjoy time spent with friends. Even if I don't talk a lot in these moments, I still enjoy them. After this thought I see an image of my old friends over top of them, all smiling and laughing. And it made me happy. After staring for a moment I started to get a slight headache, but when I tried to blink it away I saw Justin's team covered in blood for a mere moment before it disappeared. I shook my head ignoring it and proceeded to procure some bowls and start dishing out the stew. They all waited expectantly and proceeded to inhale the soup as they couldn't wait any longer. Darkness was more refined, but she still ate the stew relatively quickly. The rest of the night passed as it had been, with the other 4 talking and me off to the side not really listening in and just reading my book. This is how the next 4 days passed, Darkness joining me later in the nights as well as Justin and his team approaching while I cooked, with them looking sheepish every time and their stomachs growling. It was a relaxing 4 days with no interruptions, but it wasn't until we reached the dungeon that the mood went more serious. Outside dungeon 4 days later. The ruins were what you'd expect, almost looked like an old Roman or Greek ruin, but with much more moss and cracks throughout the place. Crumbled pillars and what seemed to be a stone path leading in, but it was riddled with cracks and overgrowth. The entrance was once again something out of what seemed like Roman or Greek architecture. With everyone suited up, me and the burly man were standing in front of the assembled group. "Alright," started the burly man, "we're splitting up into teams. After a few minutes of walking we'll come across a fork in the dungeon that spreads 5 different ways. Make sure to stay vigilant and be prepared for anything." As he finished the crowd cheered and I stepped forward. "The last death knight I fought was extremely powerful," I started, the crowd now quieting down. We were all briefed on its description other than what weapon it wields. "If you come across the knight, retreat immediately and come find me or one of the other veterans among us. I don't want to see anyone perish." "You got that?" They all nodded with serious expressions. "Let us move and show these mongrels our power," that got them riled up as we descended. After a few minutes of walking we came to the fork in the dungeon spreading 5 different ways. The 15 other people split into groups of 3 or 4 and made their way down the halls. Justin's team tried to get me to come along, but I refused, heading down the last pathway myself. I want to fight without restrictions, and if they're with me I will have to restrain myself and not go all out. Plus they seemed young and needed more experience, so it's probably best I go alone for now, and that's just what I did. I came across some hallways and rooms filled with many creatures such as undead wolves, zombies, and even goblins, which seemed to be raiding the place themselves. None of them survived. It wasn't even a challenge, I just walked down the hallways blasting the incoming enemies with waves upon waves of weapons from the gate, not even breaking stride. A few rooms had some trinkets and small magical items, but nothing that made me super excited. It wasn't till an hour into exploring that something caught my attention, and it was the sound of battle, but there were more human screams than monster screams. Slightly picking up my pace, blasting any undead in my way, and any that got past I punched them as hard as I could, sending them flying. Another scream, this one much louder. I broke into a light jog, and as I rounded the corner my eyes squinted and went dark. Not because of the amount of dead monsters, but the human body I saw on the floor in a pool of blood. Looking at the body closely I could barely tell who it was. Their limbs were all but gone, and the only part one recognized was the head. It was face down, and when I moved it over. "Justin," I spoke. My voice did not falter, nor did I show any outwards emotion as I rose to my feet and heard some more battle sounds ahead. Making it further down the path and found another body with a sword wound in their gut. "Sam," I mutter. "This is not good. Where is Rachel?" Hearing something else further ahead I felt something flying towards me. I caught it out of the air, and it was a head. Rachel's head. What in God's name could have caused this? I soon received my answer. Another adventurer roaming the halls of my home, spoke a booming voice from the darkness. They were weak, but you are different, I can sense it. It stepped into the light revealing what seemed to be a man in spiked full-plate black armor with red highlights from head to toe. Its faceplate being replaced by a skull head with glowing red lights for eyes standing over 7 feet tall. And he was carrying Rachel's headless corpse which he proceeded to toss at my feet. I tilted my head down slightly as my eyes were shadowed and my outward expression changing to a slight frown. But our battle will not be here, its deep voice echoing down the halls. Find me and avenge your comrades if you dare. It then turned into wisps of black smoke as it seemingly teleported away. I didn't know what to feel in that moment. I was angry, sure, but it's almost as if I wasn't feeling anything staring at the headless corpse of Rachel. I put her head next to her body and stared at it for another moment before looking up at where the knight was and clenched my fist. That thing is going down. The next few minutes were spent with me putting their bodies inside the gate so they did not deteriorate. If this was the real Gil, he would never put bodies of people in his gate. At least this part of me remains somewhat normal, I thought to myself as I finished collecting their bodies so their families could have a burial. Once finished, I set off at a decent walking pace, and just like before, if anything got in my way it got blasted with extreme prejudice. My thoughts were relatively empty as I made my way down the halls of the dungeon, but something came to me as I was walking, that vision I saw a few days ago of them covered in blood. I guess it was the clairvoyance coming through and I just ignored it. Nothing like that had happened with the month or so that I've been here for, so I wondered why it came through a few days ago and not once the past month. With these thoughts going through my head, I continued down the corridors with still no outwards reaction. It wasn't till I was walking for another 10 minutes that I came across a set of giant steel doors. Walking through, I was greeted with what I can only describe as the boss room. But I wasn't the only one there. Bodies were spread throughout the room, but they were all either barely conscious or passed out, with only 2 people still standing at the ready. Burly Man and Darkness were staring down the Death Knight that was directly in front of them with only some minor scuffs on his armor. Meanwhile, the Burly Man had cuts all over his body and was panting slightly. Darkness was more or less the same, but panting more for a different reason, even though her expression was more or less dead serious. The first one to notice was the Death Knight. So you have finally arrived, it said, staring directly at me. He had some blood-red spear on his back that was covered in spikes, and its tip looked more like a glaive or a halberd instead of your average spear tip. Looks similar to Gibalg, but it definitely isn't. But he wasn't wielding it. He was using a sword that seemed no different than your average claymore sword. Darkness turned to match my gaze. Gilgamesh, help us slay this foul beast. I glanced at her. Take everyone else and leave. What? Her and Burly Man said simultaneously. I gave a slight glare to them as over 15 gates appeared behind me with weapons of all kinds sliding out and the previous Death Knight's sword dropping into my outreached hand. Damn, the most I ever opened was 7, but I can't think about that, just have to chalk it up to my anger, and boy could I feel the strain of opening more gates than usual. Trying not to show signs of strain, I looked at both of them. I said, leave. But why? With our combined might this thing lasts no chance, spoke Darkness. What she said Burly Man. I have a score to settle with this filthy, disgusting mongrel. Now. Leave. I raised my voice, which seemed to shock Darkness since she's never seen me this mad. She seemed to hesitate, but she eventually started to bring unconscious bodies out of the room, the Burly Man grunting and following her. Any person that could still move assisted as best they could, and as they were leaving the room the Burly Man said, give 'em hell, as he left with the last of the adventurers. With the others finally gone, I stared down the Death Knight with a slight glare and my full gilitude coming through. You are nothing but a mongrel and will die here, I said with a dark look in my eye as the portals glowed an ominous yellow, shadowing the front of my body, only showing the glints on my armor and my practically glowing eyes. A very menacing look. Just because you bested a Death Knight before and wield his weapon doesn't mean you'll defeat me. We continued to stare at each other for what felt like hours until the knight exploded from where he was and rushed me at top speed. In response, I fired a hail of weapons, slowing his approach as he dodged and deflected the blades while getting closer. He eventually made it through the onslaught and we clashed. Sparks flew in every direction as we fought for dominance. The floor was beginning to crack and chunks of stone were coming up as the knight slowly pushed me back. Not standing for this any longer, I poured magic into my sword and it started to glow a bright gold as I gained newfound strength. Using that strength, I overpowered the knight and managed to push his sword into the air and putting him off balance, which left him open for a barrage of weapons slamming into him, sending him back a few feet. Not wasting any opportunities, one rushed the knight. I continued to assault him with weapons when I drew close and my whole body as well as my sword were coated in a golden glow and fire, as I hit the knight in the gut with a mighty swing, sending him flying into the wall across the room. The knight slowly peeled himself from the wall and chuckled. I see you're not some average adventurer. He spoke, now free from the wall and adopting a new stance with his left foot sliding back and his sword pointed at me from above his head. I can sense it. Your blood has divine properties. A black wispy flame slowly surrounded him. I will no longer hold back. He exploded once more and we repeated the same process as before, but this time instead of clashing we started exchanging a flurry of blows. Every swing I made was either parried or dodged and I was getting hit more and more until the knight broke my guard and spin kicked me. While flying through the air I released another barrage of weapons with the knight deflecting them with more ease than before. When I landed on the ground the knight rushed again and landed a solid swing with his sword in my gut. I coughed up some blood and spit as I rocketed into the steel doors at full speed feeling as if I got hit by a train. The doors were locked so I did not fly through the doors and I left an imprint on the doors as I hit the floor. I slowly pushed myself to my feet using my sword as a cane to rise up into a standing position, my armor slightly cracked. It seems I overestimated you, taunted the knight. This caused my blood to practically ignite with rage fueled by pride. I closed the gates behind me and poured a lot of my magic power into the sword. Don't talk down to me you mongrel. Winds whipped around me violently as I was surrounded by a roaring golden flame this time. Throwing caution to the wind I rushed the knight again in a full offensive. I clashed with the knight so ferociously that the room started to shake as we exchanged blows, neither gaining nor losing ground. My armor was being slowly chipped away as well as the Death Knight's in a ferocious flurry of swords. We broke apart and we stared at each other as both our armors were practically falling off, revealing his skeletal body and my armor revealing my six-packed body that looked to be chiseled from the finest marble. Red tattoos lined the sides of my body and my right bicep. You're growing tired. It's about time I end this game. The knight's sword clattered to the floor as he pulled the spear from his back. He slid his right foot back and the tip of the spear was pointed towards the ground and he leaned forward slightly. With the wispy black flames still surrounding the knight his spear started to gain a red and black haze as he stared at me. This is where it ends. You were a worthy opponent but you will die here. The floor cracked beneath his foot as he propelled himself forward. As he drew closer I tried to stop him by blasting him with weapons more intensely than I ever had before and it was hitting the knight, chipping his armor more and more with only his metal greaves and legs being left. But he still powered through it and showed no signs of stopping, so I formed a plan that I hoped would work. At the last moment I poured almost the rest of my magic into the sword and went to block the attack. The Death Knight crashed into me and cracked the sword almost instantly and we skid across the room with me using every single ounce of strength I had to block the attack. When we finally came to a stop with me being pinned against the wall he leaned in and muttered. This is where you fall, man with god blood. The knight used his spear to swipe my sword from my hands, causing it to hit the floor with the roaring golden flames still surrounding the sword as it dissipated into gold motes and returned to the gate. The knight thrusted for my gut but I managed to move slightly to the right so he missed anything vital, but it still hurt like hell. Coughing up a decent chunk of blood and having blood flow out of my gut I slowly looked to him and smirked. My name is Gilgamesh. A gate opened above my head as the great sword from before still coated in roaring gold flames was launched through the Death's Knight head as it stumbled back, pulling the spear out of my body, causing more blood to shoot out. Grunting in pain I fell to one knee, panting as I looked at the Death Knight who had a massive hole in its skull staring directly at me. With only half his skull remaining and my magic coursing through him he huffed, well played, Gilgamesh. He then crumbled to the floor. With no winds from my roaring flames or attacks my hair went loose and was no longer defying gravity. I used every ounce of my strength to make portals and grab the broken chunks of my armor and taking the Death Knight's weapon. Still on one knee, I pushed myself up, barely being able to stand as the doors to the room opened and I limped out the door, blood dripping from my wound. I procured a healing potion and downed it in one go, alleviating some of my pain, which was enough to keep me walking but barely enough to keep me conscious. Limping for close to 10 minutes is when my legs gave out and I kneeled down again. Damn it, I'm not dying here, as I strained myself even more to move. It took what felt like years to reach the staircase to the exit. I'm so close I can taste it, I grunted and forced myself up the stairs, with each step feeling like I was being punched in the gut. After what felt like an eternity I reached daylight and the first thing I saw was darkness yelling at the burly guy. Ruffian, we have to go back. So that was his name. He could meet us at any moment. She seemed almost scared. Kid, he'll be fine, he will make it back alive, he responded with a resolve of steel. I chuckled slightly, coughing up some blood as that gained their attention. They turned around shocked to see me in the state I was in and with a grin I spoke, of course I'd make it back, cough cough, some more blood escapes. I am the great Gilgamesh after all. Darkness immediately ran towards me and as she did I started to fall forward, but before I hit the ground she caught me. You fool. You could have died, she yelled with tears dotting the edge of her eyes. And I will if I'm not healed, I chuckled as I started to lose consciousness. Gilgamesh. Someone who no healing plea dash, those were the last words I heard before sleep overtook me. My magic was exhausted and I had a hole in my gut, so I slowly fell asleep. Sometime later. It felt as if I was underwater, my limbs felt light yet so heavy as I drifted along, not hearing any sounds but my thoughts. I couldn't open my eyes at the moment, so I ayed there, continuing to drift along, but after what felt like hours I tried to force my eyes open but they refused. I began to grow frustrated and attempted to open them for what felt like hours until progress was finally being made. My hearing was returning as I could faintly hear birds chirping in the distance and the clopping of horse hooves and the squeaking of carriage wheels. When I finally opened my eyes, I was greeted with a white tarp and some wood holding said tarp. I must be in a carriage. Not wanting to lay down any longer, I forced myself up and immediately hissed in pain, which caught someone's attention. "You shouldn't be getting up," said a voice, and soon after I noticed a blonde woman kneeling beside me looking down at me. It was Darkness. She slowly pushed me back down and stared down at me. "You were hurt pretty bad and you've been asleep for 2 days now," she said, causing my eyes to widen slightly. "We left after the first day since we were trying to find Justin's team but turned up nothing." I looked at her and tried to speak, but my voice felt incredibly weak and my throat more dry than a desert. She quickly realized this and propped me up to take a sip of water, which felt like liquid gold at the moment. I let out a sigh and whispered thank you and waited until I regained enough strength to speak. "Justin's team was killed by the Death Knight." She flinched at that. "I have their bodies in my gate to bring back to Axel so they may receive a proper burial and be with their families. We guessed that they perished and I'm sure their families will be glad they can at least have a proper funeral," she said while looking downcast. To lighten the mood, I looked to her and smirked a bit. "I guess you wish that you could be in my position." She seemed incredibly confused at this. "To be in as much pain as I was and am currently in would be a masochist's dream." Her face lit up and she immediately pouted and yelled at me, "I would not. That's not how it works." "Oh, so you admit you are a masochist then?" My grin grew even more as she sputtered, looking for an excuse. I bellowed out a hearty laugh, but it was short-lived as I started to cough and my gut was burning. She looked at me, huffed and looked away, seeming upset and embarrassed but not angry. After my coughs and chuckles died down, I looked down and saw my lower abdomen wrapped in bandages and noticed the armor from my legs was gone and I was wearing a pair of brown pants under the sheet that covered me. "Where's the rest of my armor? And who changed me?" I asked. She looked back with the red in her face gone and responded, "Ruffian took off your armor and changed you after one of the casters healed you with magic and one of the caravan members wrapped you up. Your armor is just behind you." Tilting my head back ever so slightly, I saw some of the greaves and opened a gate, allowing it to fall inside to be repaired in my gate. Darkness then continued, "I'm guessing you picked up the rest of your armor to get repaired in that gate of yours?" I nodded. She nodded back and we stayed silent for close to 10 minutes before she asked, "Are you hungry? I have some soup if you'd like. It's not as good as anything you cook, but you can have some." I nod. She props me up again but leans me against the seat of the carriage and tries to feed me. "I can feed myself." I slowly reach up and grab the soup and slowly bring it to my lips. A tad salty but not too bad. We continued to chat for a while before I grew tired again and she seemed to notice, so she laid me back down after fluffing my pillow a bit and I soon fell asleep. And it wasn't till a few hours later I woke up and noticed the carriage wasn't moving, but I did hear the sound of chatter just outside and I noticed the sun was setting through a small part at the entrance of the cart, but Darkness wasn't around. "She's probably outside." With pure will and effort I stood up after a few moments and made my way to the exit of the cart to step outside for some air. When I reached the exit I sat down and slid off the back, my feet now touching the ground. The air had a slight chill to it, so quickly I flashed on my usual white shirt and black pants with some black shoes, and this caught everyone's attention. "There he is," called out Ruffian, a cup in his hand presumably filled with alcohol of some sort, "the man who single-handedly killed a Death Knight." The rest of the group let out a cheer as I approached the group slowly and had a chair with a cushion on the seat and back. I sat down with a sigh next to where Darkness was sitting on a log as Ruffian spoke again. "Let his hair down too and is out of that armor," he said, causing everyone to chuckle. "I guess my hair isn't spiked up right now," I thought to myself and let out a chuckle, opening up a gate and grabbing a goblet with some wine. But before I could drink it, Darkness snatched it and said, "You shouldn't be drinking, you need to recover." I sigh and dismiss the goblet, causing the group to chuckle again. The rest of the night passed by quite nicely as everyone but me had something to drink. Everyone laughed and talked the night away, and Ruffian took a few jabs at Darkness for apparently barely leaving my side as I was unconscious, which she blushed at and yelled at Ruffian comically. I let out a hearty gil laugh at Darkness' expense, but she seemed fine, just embarrassed, and would mutter about a different kind of shaming and how this wasn't what she liked. I was the only one that caught that, so I once again laughed, causing her to look away. A few weeks later, back in Axel. When we arrived back in Axel, it felt good to be back. I still wasn't wearing my armor and had my hair down, which was nice to do. A good majority of my strength had returned and I could walk with no issue, but it would take another few days before I could take on any quests. After arriving at the guild, we reported to Luna what took place, and she seemed incredibly relieved we were okay and seemed surprised yet concerned that I was hurt as bad as I was. We all received almost 200,000 Eris as a reward, and I received an extra 300,000 for killing the Death Knight, who apparently had a decent bounty on his head. Lucky me. After a short party when we arrived back in town, I gave the guild the bodies of Justin, Rachel, and Sam, which they thanked me for and said while the families would be sad, they could at least have a proper funeral. The few days I spent recovering were relaxing but boring. I mostly stayed home reading and distributing the points I got from leveling up after defeating the Death Knight, which was a whole 5 levels worth of points, and now I was level 20. I unlocked a few things from my gate, like less mana consumption, and increased the amount of gates I was able to use and distributed the rest towards my basic stats. When I finally started taking quests again, I started off small and worked my way up, but didn't go more than a day or two outside the city just to have some more money coming in and being able to test the new magic spear I got. And now we make it to the present. I was sitting at my usual table sipping on some wine and reading a house listing paper. Why, you ask? I wanted a place of my own that wasn't some small apartment. I've been here practically 3 months now and I can already purchase a small mansion. It's pretty great, I think to myself as I hear the guild door burst open and see 2 people panting at the door. One was an average kid, maybe 17 or so, with brown hair and green eyes, wearing a green tracksuit, which caught my eye. A tracksuit? I haven't seen anything like that in the 3 months I've been here. Could he be someone from Earth? I then glanced at his supposed partner when I almost choked on my wine and stared at the person next to him. Blue hair with a weird swirl ponytail, blue eyes, blue outfit, and I'm sensing some divinity from her. Is that freaking Aqua? I shout in my head. How is Aqua here? It's been a few minutes since they entered the guild, and the events that followed up until now were quite funny. The kid walked up to Ruffian and was trying to act suave, and it even seemed to work as he directed him to Luna after welcoming him to hell. They then tried to register but didn't seem to have any money. Currently they were sitting at a table across the guild and they seemed to be arguing about their current situation. It probably didn't help that whenever a waitress would approach them asking if they were ready to order, their mood turned worse and just seemed to be depressed, as they would respond with that they needed more time. It wasn't till Aqua stood up and pointed at some priest who was about 5 tables from me, marched up to him and practically begged for money. The man responded with he was of the Eris faith, and you could practically hear glass shattering as he gave her some money anyway. It took all I had not to explode with laughter as she returned to the table completely crestfallen. I am curious as to what the situation is with them. And see where the kid is from. Getting up from my seat and storing the house listing in my gate, I walked over. Aqua was too crestfallen to notice my approach, but the kid looked up and flinched when I approached. Probably intimidating to see a man with spiky blonde hair and red eyes wearing magnificent gold armor approach you with a smirk, the smirk coming from Aqua's dilemma. Ho! A goddess in the mortal realm? Why do you grace us with your presence? Aqua slowly turned her head to me. Her eyes were practically blank and tears dotted the edge of her eyes, but then what I said registered and her eyes gained some life. Why, you believe me? You are the one who sent me here, I respond, crossing my arms. She seemed to get excited about this and turned to the kid. See, Kazuma, I told you I'd be recognized as a great goddess, she said to the now named Kazuma. I said I recognized you as a goddess but not a great one. She then whips her head around with the same expression as she had from the priest earlier. Letting out a hearty classic Gil laugh, she stared at me with a pout and tears started to well up in her eyes again. The rest of the guild glanced at me surprised, since I almost never genuinely laugh in front of them. Man, I just couldn't resist. I continue to laugh. I'm able to sense her divinity, so I know she's the real deal. Kazuma then looks at me, something clicking in his head. Wait, hold on a second. He stood up with his hands on the table. You said she sent you here. Are you from Earth? My chuckles died down a few moments later as I glanced at Kazuma, still smirking. That would be correct. What ability did you choose? I just stared at him with a gaze that screamed, you serious, and he just continued to stare and blink at me. So in response I opened up about 10 gates, which caused them to flinch, and various weapons slowly crept out, and similar to what happened with the last Death Knight. It must have seemed extremely intimidating as Aqua went behind Kazuma for cover as something seemed to click in his head as his head hit the table and he started mumbling and groaning. Something about it not being fair. I gave a light chuckle and dismissed the gates. You were going to register as an adventurer. He proceeded to grumble and make his way to Luna, who tried to seem like she didn't notice the money begging part. After Luna took the coins, she had them fill out their information and was now telling them about some classes and leading them towards the crystal contraption so it could measure their stats. Kazuma went first and was in awe over the crystal with how it was glowing and the contraptions around it were moving. Once it was finished, Luna grabbed his card and started to read his stats. Your stats are average across the board, she began. Your intelligence is fairly high, so that's good, Anne. Oh, your luck stat is very high as well, and only Gilgamesh has a similar stat to this. It's not an essential skill, so I'd personally recommend something like a merchant. Aqua started to chuckle at this and I let a small one escape as well. Kazuma, being upset about this, mumbled something about her crushing his dreams as an adventurer. Sorry, but I'm just gonna stick with going as an adventurer. He dropped his head and seemed depressed. Luna tried to console him by saying he can still level up, and she started apologizing while trying to cheer him up, but it didn't seem to be working too well. Aqua walked up to the crystal while Kazuma was staring at his card, and then she laid her hands on the crystal. The first thing that came out of Luna's mouth when Aqua touched the crystal was the fact her intelligence and luck were really low, causing me to let out a chuckle as she pouted at me. But apparently all her other stats were incredibly high, and she even was mentioning how they were compared to my starting stats. Aqua was relishing in the compliments, but I tuned the rest of it out for the most part. I mean, she's a goddess and this body is 2/3 god or something, so no wonder we have higher stats. While I was thinking to myself, practically the whole guild was around her as she chose to be an archpriest, and she started grabbing skills almost immediately. Not really caring for what was happening, I went to a nearby table and pulled out the house listings again. While everyone is fawning over her, I might as well look for a place. There weren't very many places that piqued my interest. All the bigger houses are way too big, and while a big house would be nice, I'm probably going to be the only one living there. And it's not like my gilitude is preventing me from buying only the biggest and most best-looking houses. Just as I was about to put away the listing, a house caught my eye at the last moment. Wait, I thought, looking at the house, it looks like my old house. Staring at this picture, I started to feel homesick a little bit, and I immediately knew what I was going to do. Just as I dismissed the listing, I noticed Kazuma approach me and sit next to me and let out a sigh. I gathered your name is Gilgamesh, but what is your real name? He asked. Not seeing any harm, I responded. Michael Zangro. Kazuma Satu. He extended his hand and we shook them. Don't suppose you'd be willing to help me out a bit? Luna recommended some toad quest, and I don't really have any money for a weapon. Thinking for a moment, I made my response. While I can't spare any money right now, I can give you some advice. There is a place by the southern wall you can do some construction work for enough money to buy a sword. The toads hate metal and are resistant to most forms of magic, so buy something like a short sword and don't use magic against them. Now I must be off. Standing up, I made my way to the exit, and Kazuma thanking me as I left the building. The sun was starting to set as I made it to the house that I purchased. When I arrived, there was a real estate agent waiting when I arrived, and he showed me around the house. It was 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, had an open concept basement and main floor, a laundry room, a hairdressing area of all things in the basement, and a small workshop in the basement as well. It wasn't a very large house, but it was just for me so far, and it reminded me of my old home. The front of the house had 3 steps leading up to the front door, and to the right of it there was a porch which would be nice to sit on in the morning. It was a brick/stone house, and it had 3 large windows by the porch that you could see outside and inside from. The backyard was decently spacious and had a deck with a fireplace as well as a small shed at the side of the house between the house and the fence. The walls on the inside were painted a very light blue which seemed almost white and had dark hardwood floors. After the brief tour, I talked prices with the agent and managed to get it cheaper than the asking price since I paid up front, all in cash/coin. The expression on the real estate agent's face was pretty hilarious when a golden portal opened up and dropped a massive bag full of money that he struggled to lift and take back to his place of business. There wasn't any furniture at the moment other than things like kitchen cabinets and appliances that weren't taken when the previous owners sold the house, but that could be changed easily. I had a few things in my gate that I used to furnish the house, which included a few tables and chairs, but no sofas or mattresses, which I would have to purchase. Probably should have bought a mattress, but didn't think I needed one till recently. After I furnished what I could, I ended off the night sitting in the backyard having a small fire in the fireplace that was outside. I was in my casual clothes with my hair down, sipping some wine from a goblet as I stared into the fire, reminiscing on all the events that happened since my arrival. Became a demigod, killed toads, cleared a dungeon with a masochist, and killed a death knight in said dungeon as well as another one in a separate dungeon which I almost died in. And now I'm having a fire and drinking wine in my backyard with a house I just bought. That last bit is one of the more weird parts surprisingly. I continued to stare into the fire for a while, and when it finally went to embers I went back in my house. Still weird to think that, heading to what would be my bedroom, I slipped into a bedroll I procured and slowly drifted to sleep. I had multiple dreams last night and the details were fuzzy, but I did see one that involved a swarm of cabbages which was extremely weird, but I dismissed it to my habit of having weird dreams. It's been 2 weeks or so since I purchased my house, and most of the time spent was decorating and purchasing things for the house. I went on a few quests, but the quest pickings were slim the past few weeks. Probably doesn't help that I took on a lot of quests in general. There wasn't a shortage on quests, but all the immediate easy quests were all completed, so there were no monsters in the area that were an immediate threat. Maybe I should attempt one of the more difficult quests like the one to kill a griffin or a pack of fire drakes or maybe a wyvern, I thought to myself as I was nearing the guild. Or I could just go on a vacation. That would surely be nice, but these past few weeks have been boring, so I'd rather do something interesting. When I arrived at the guild I saw Kazuma with Darkness, her friend Chris, Aqua, and some small girl dressed in red with a wizard's hat, an eye patch and a magic staff. Chris seemed to be upset about something and Darkness was blushing. Seems interesting, I thought as I made my way over. What seems to be the issue? Hello Gilgamesh, responded Darkness. I was just about to tell the tales of Kazuma's most recent exploit. You do not have to do that, responded Kazuma. But what you did was unspeakable, she responded and seemed almost happy with what it was. Then leave it as unspeakable. Kazuma responded. Letting out a sigh, I said, just tell me what it was. Darkness cleared her throat. Chris was teaching Kazuma a thief skill and he used it on her to steal her panties and demanded a ransom, and he took all the money she had. She seemed way too happy about it. Would you please let me handle this? Kazuma exclaimed. Chris then responded while crying, I was gonna give back his pouch, but he insisted I pay all the money I had to get them back. Aqua and the kid seemed disgusted by this. Would you please stop, was Kazuma's response. I know that's what happened, but still. They then went back and forth for a while until my face finally cracked and I let out a chuckle, which they all immediately snapped their heads to look at me. I then busted into a fit of hysterical laughter as I all but collapsed onto the floor. Ha 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 ha, that is hilarious, ha 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 ha. The commotion caused what little people were in the guild to stare at Kazuma in disgust and slight disgust towards me as well for laughing. Darkness still seemed to be extremely happy and Chris started to pout at me. Kazuma seemed more or less the same, and Aqua's disgusted face along with the kids continued to look disgusted. After procuring a cup of water from my gate I managed to calm down and was barely able to hear Kazuma mention something about the rest of the women in the guild looked like they wanted to cut his balls off. Did you really learn a skill, asked Aqua, or were you just horsing around? Huh? Kazuma turned. Of course I did. Now watch this. Steal. A light glowed around his hand as something fell into it. The kid then looked extremely embarrassed as her head hung low when Kazuma opened his hand to show what he stole. Turned out to be the kid's underwear. The place went silent as the kid asked for her panties back and Aqua called him disgusting, followed by the kid calling him a pervert. Darkness then went in front of them and all but demanded to join their party, which Kazuma responded with a solid hell no. And this sent Darkness in a state of euphoria as she screamed, then mumbled something like, so cruel and cold. Letting out a chuckle I put my hand on Kazuma's shoulder, causing him to jump. It's best you say yes, she will be like this and it will get even worse until you answer yes. And how do you know her? We cleared a dungeon together where I first learned of her interests, and we also participated in a raid together. I don't want another crazy person in my party. This caused Aqua and the kid to pout as Darkness seemed even more happy. The scene eventually calmed down and all of us were sat at a table, and the kid, who I learned was named Megumin, was reading Darkness card. She was gushing over how strong Darkness seemed. We'd be crazy to turn her down. She was showing the card to Aqua as Kazuma said, I'd rather have him in my party. He pointed at me. I shrugged and responded with, I only join a party when I can further my own goals, and right now I have no desire to join. He seemed upset at this. He then tried to dissuade Darkness from joining, but he mentioned how they were gonna kill the Demon King and she could be captured and tortured, which was the complete wrong move. I thought he would have figured this out by now. While Darkness has her tendencies and weaknesses, her defense is no joke and can be a useful shield. I can attest to that, and also denying her something is just gonna have her want it more. That was my reasoning. She seemed happy I was on her side. I tuned out the rest for a while until I heard the town's alarm bells sounding off as well as a siren. The people in the streets outside were in a state of panic as Luna announced an emergency quest and that all adventurers needed to report to the main gate. Thinking there was a horde of undead or something, I got up along with the rest and we quickly made our way over to the main gates. All the adventurers seemed incredibly serious as we ran to the gates. When we arrived, I was preparing for the worst case scenario with the possibility that it was a demon general or an army of undead. I waited with bated breath as I was getting ready to prepare the Death Knight's magical weapons for combat. We waited. And waited. And waited. A fog of green appearing over the horizon, and it seemed like thousands of something were approaching the city. Everyone other than Kazuma, who seemed either extremely serious or were smirking at the thought of a challenge, preparing themselves. Darkness was saying she would protect everyone as Kazuma asked, "What's happening? Are we gonna be attacked by monsters or something?" Aqua then appeared carrying a basket. "No silly, those aren't monsters, they're cabbages." My eye then twitched as I focused my vision. With the prowess of my eyes, I looked further onto the horizon and I saw smiling faces on cabbages. My blood practically ignited as my gilitude started to slip in. "Cabbages," I mumbled. "Cabbages," I said a little louder. "Cabbages." Oh boy, was I angry, and I had a dream about and dismissed it. I should really not ignore those. A few people jumped at my outburst as I opened about 20 gates and various weapons slowly slid out. "Gilgamesh, are you okay?" asked Kazuma, but I didn't hear him. "We should move away from him," mumbled Darkness. "Part of me wants to get closer though." The cabbages got closer and what could only be described as a tidal wave of weapons got unleashed into the cabbages and tore through hundreds with no effort. All the members were either impressed or shocked with how many CPM I was taking down, cabbages per minute. With a lot still managing to slip through, the rest of the adventurers started to either collect the fallen or start taking on some cabbages themselves. Aqua started to explain the history of the cabbages for what seemed like days before I turned around still firing a hail of weapons and yelled, "I don't care, just kill these things." This caused Aqua to beep and stop talking. Then I turned my attention back to the cabbages. With the people thinking this as a war cry, they all yelled and rushed forward. I don't know why I'm so mad, but just preparing for something that was supposed to be exhilarating is now just something as stupid as flying cabbages. I continued to put them through a literal shredder for a while until I closed off the gates. All the approaching ones are dead, and I think I've vented enough. Opening a few gates, I collected the ones I killed and put them in the cages they had prepared. After this, I am going on a quest. Preferably one that's further out, maybe even on an island that I need to take a boat to. Walking up to the city gates, I crossed my arms and observed the rest of the cabbage harvest. It was going smoothly, and at one point Darkness tried to show off and ended up missing everything. And now she's getting pelted to the point her armor is coming off. She was protecting some adventurers that got knocked down and looked like a river was just going to pour from her crotch. And now the lowly is getting her freak on and shouting how she must use an explosion. Kazuma was trying to stop her from using some spell, but she already began chanting some long-winded, not needed, chant. The resulting magic circles and the following explosion was extremely impressive to say the least. The resulting explosion was like a mini nuke and it engulfed an enormous amount of the cabbages, but it did hit a bunch of adventurers as well. The rest of the event went without issue as we returned to the guild when the sun started to set. There was a party going on and cabbage was being served all over, which tasted surprisingly good. I decided to join the group and was sitting at a table with them sipping some wine and not really listening to them. They were talking about each other's abilities and how great they were when the conversation eventually turned to me. "And Gilgamesh was as strong as ever," said Darkness. "Yeah, it was awesome," Megumin started. "It's not as magnificent as my explosions, but you took out the most cabbages in just a few minutes." I smirked. Of course, it's only natural that I would be the best." I took a sip of wine. "You're so lucky getting that power," said Kazuma. "I just got hurt," jabs a finger at Aqua. "Hey. I'm a goddess, how dare you?" "You're not very godlike, Kazuma, you just drink most of the time and mooch off me. And you used all your skill points to learn party tricks." "Party tricks?" I let out a chuckle as I glanced at Darkness, who seemed to be genuinely happy. "You seem happy." She glanced at me with a smile. "It's nice to finally be accepted into a party." She then watched Kazuma continue to argue with Aqua as Megumin even joined in, causing a three-way argument. "You should join, I'm sure everyone wouldn't mind." "I know I wouldn't." I chuckled, taking a sip of wine. "Well, you know me, I prefer to work alone, but if you guys need help I'll see if I can grace you with my presence." She chuckled at this. "I am planning to go on a quest tomorrow and I'll be gone for about a month." She seemed surprised. "What kind of quest?" "Strong monster." The last part she got excited at. "Easy there, it's just a quest to go and figure out what's happening to some local areas on an island a few weeks away. It's more of a resort island, so I will take a few days off there as well." "Well, I hope you enjoy yourself and I look forward to your return." She smiled as I dismissed my wine and got up to leave. Just before I left I turned to darkness. I do have a favor to ask, she glanced at me, since I will be gone for about a month I need someone to look after my house. I don't know the teleportation spell so I can't return periodically to check on it. Me standing up to leave got the attention of the rest of the group and Darkness seemed surprised. When did you purchase a house? A few weeks ago. Well, I can't turn down a favor from a friend. I'll gladly help. I then opened a gate in front of her and dropped a spare key on the table which she then pocketed. Don't suppose we could stay in the house at all? Asked Kazuma. I've been sleeping in the stables with this useless goddess and I may just lose my mind. Aqua then pouted. I closed my eyes in thought for a moment. I mean, I won't be here for almost a month and as long as they clean the place I can trust Darkness to keep a handle on things. While she likes to be bossed around more than anything she knows when to make it count, that I opened my eyes and responded. Very well. Kazuma then pumped his fist in the air as he practically prayed to me like a commoner would a god. Which wasn't necessarily wrong in this case. Get off the floor, he stood, on one condition, you must clean the place and make sure to wash the sheets at least once a week. I turned to Darkness, and you may stay as well if you wish, but if they act out of line you will tell me and when I return I will give out punishment. I then opened up a few gates with some weapons sliding out creating an ominous glow and shadowing my features but my red eyes. I'm just gonna call this my intimidation pose / tactic and stared at Aqua and Kazuma looking as intimidating as possible. Am I making myself clear? They both jumped and let out a resounding, yes sir, and with that I took my leave and went home for the night. I did have one dream though and it was centered on torrents of fire, definitely not ignoring this one. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.